Welcome to the Alien Dusk, the world of science fiction, where extraordinary tales come to life. Enjoy the journey. The Citadel did not breathe. It hummed, an endless, precise vibration woven into the glass-steel bones of the orbital university that hung like a crown above the fifth moon of Zirith. It was a marvel of Xerelian engineering, tiered gardens that never knew decay, libraries suspended in vacuum-sealed chambers, architecture carved from crystal grown in orbit. And it was cold. Not physically, the climate regulators saw to that, but spiritually. The Citadel existed not to nurture, but to observe, to catalog, to judge. When the announcement echoed through its polished halls, "Welcome to the Citadel, specimen 682-A, human, male," there was no applause. No one turned. Just another entry. Another primitive species admitted into the Xerelian observation tier, a diplomatic form of condescension. Earth had earned its place only recently, after decades of petitions and tests, and it was clear to everyone that this human wasn't here to impress. He was here to be measured. Danny Quinn shuffled forward like someone who'd wandered into the wrong room and was too polite to say so. Slender, average height, curly brown hair that never quite sat right. He looked more like a math teacher than a diplomat. He wore Earth-standard formal wear, blazer, collared shirt, soft shoes with real laces, no weapons, no tech enhancements. Just a small badge that translated his words with a half-second delay. He didn't radiate presence. He didn't assert. He observed. The Xerelians found him amusing in the same way one might admire a small animal standing upright. Quaint, improbable, harmless. His job title, Terran Cultural Liaison, sounded more like a favor than a function. But Danny never corrected them. He asked thoughtful questions. He nodded while others talked. He remembered names. And when he laughed, it wasn't loud, but it was real. The kind that disarmed without trying. The kind that made the arrogance in the room feel a little hollow. The scholars spoke in High Xerelian, assuming, not incorrectly, that Danny didn't understand a word. "He secretes oils through the skin," mused Zarnathi, tilting her head as if inspecting a lab sample. "And smells faintly of citrus and mammalian musk? Fascinating." "Fascinating is generous," replied Vashira, her voice dripping with amusement. "They call it pheromonal bonding, chemical manipulation through emotion. No wonder their civilizations rise and fall like crops." Izara, the eldest among them and high commander of Citadel security, sipped from her chalice and smirked. "Their mating rituals are comedies. Pair bonding, gestation. Imagine slowing down military readiness for emotional comfort. Entire strategies compromised for softness." The laughter was quiet, sharp-edged. It wasn't cruel in the way predators are cruel. It was colder. The academic sneer of those who saw no value in fragility. Not one of them noticed Danny glance briefly in their direction. Nor did they see the quiet understanding flicker behind his eyes. The mixer was hosted in the Hall of Echoes, a domed chamber with acoustics designed to amplify silence as much as sound. Alien delegates mingled like diplomats at a masquerade, each adorned in ceremonial garb, each fluent in the choreography of cold courtesy. Danny stood near the fruit table. A small crowd of Xerelian officials gathered to watch him sample the offerings. His translator badge shimmered faintly as it decoded the alien languages around him, just a fraction too late to be seamless. They asked him questions like one might ask a trained animal to perform. "Your species uses teeth to break food down? Tell me, do you feel sadness when others die? You must tell us. Do you really sleep so long, unguarded?" Danny smiled, gently navigating each inquiry like a man dodging raindrops. He was polite, warm, but in their eyes he was not a peer. He was entertainment, a Terran novelty on two legs. When one of them called him delightfully pliant, Danny's response was a soft chuckle. "I think you're funny too," he said. It wasn't sarcasm, just honest. The words caught them off guard. Zarnathi narrowed her eyes. "You understand us?" "Some," he shrugged. "Enough. High Xerelian syntax is similar to Terran Latin, and sarcasm's a bit universal, don't you think?" There was a pause. Tension? Surprise? It was hard to tell. But Danny didn't push. Instead, he complimented their data stream architecture, asked about gravitational harmonics in their elevator systems, and listened when Azara explained the diplomatic protocols of the observation tier. He listened with interest, not politeness, and responded with thoughtful curiosity. When Vashira joked about the Terran inability to regulate emotions, Danny nodded. Yeah, it's messy, but sometimes messy is how you survive, or connect, or love. That word, love, hung awkwardly in the air, a sound both foreign and unnecessary. But Danny didn't flinch. He didn't defend it. He let it exist. And something shifted. Just slightly. He wasn't what they expected. He didn't challenge their superiority, didn't beg for approval, didn't flinch from their mockery. He just stood there and kind, calm, and utterly unafraid. Izara watched him leave. There was no grandeur in his exit, no parting words or clever turn of phrase. Just a soft thank you, a half bow, and that same baffling smile. It was not a predator's grin, nor was it submissive. It was something in between. A smile with weight behind it, a calm, inexplicable assurance. It lingered in her thoughts long after the chamber had emptied. Illogical, unnecessary. Yet there it was. Izara, engineered for clarity, trained in detachment, found herself distracted by a man whose species was known for nothing and whose name she had not meant to remember. Izara had reviewed footage thousands of times in her life. It was part of the job. Analyze, catalog, file, forget. But this she replayed. The mixer, the human, his words. She told herself it was academic interest, a performance audit. That smile, inefficient, excessive, undisciplined. Yet she watched it loop again. The footage caught it all. The way his shoulders softened before speaking. The moment he paused instead of retaliating. The spark of mischief behind a compliment. She marked it for deletion, then didn't confirm the command. Emotion is a chemical flaw, she muttered, tapping her talon against the desk. Disruptive. Primal. And yet, she leaned closer to the screen. His laugh was faint but real. No encoded manipulation, no premeditated flirtation, just warmth leaking through a species she had classified as mildly sentient with unpredictable emotional impulses. This was not attraction, not fixation. That would be absurd. This was a curiosity, a statistical outlier, a human-shaped anomaly in a room of perfect constants. Still, she watched again, and again. Danny opened the door to his quarters, with a smile and an apple slice in hand. Commander Izara, he said cheerfully, didn't expect you. I'm here under the pretense of cultural inquiry, she stated flatly. He blinked, gestured her in without hesitation. Cool, can I offer tea? I've got the kind that tastes like cinnamon and regret. The quarters were modest, barely 5 meters wide, cluttered with human oddities, handwritten journals, a battered guitar, a hologram of Earth rotating in quiet nostalgia. The temperature was a few degrees too warm for Zarelian comfort. Izara remained standing. You're here to ask questions? Danny sat on a worn armchair that looked like it had stories. Shoot. She meant to control the flow, to dissect this oddity in conversational layers, assert superiority, and disarm whatever emotional gravity he had used on her and the others. Instead, she found herself answering when he asked about her homeworld. She talked too long, revealed too much, and when he asked softly, "Do you ever get tired of being the strongest person in every room?" She didn't have a prepared response. For the first time in decades, she forgot her script. They sat in companionable quiet, the kind that made the Citadel feel smaller. Danny sipped tea. Izara watched him. He spoke without preamble. There was this man on Earth, Danny began, used to play the violin in a subway station. No audience, no tips. Just played. Every day. Rain or shine. Said he didn't care if anyone listened. The music made the world feel less empty. She didn't interrupt. There's power in doing something beautiful when no one's watching, he added softly. The story wasn't strategic, not performative, just a moment, gifted freely. And something in Azara's mind stumbled. There was no evolutionary benefit in beauty without witness, no status gain in vulnerability, no logic in the purity of a melody echoing into uncaring void. Yet it struck something deep in her, something old, dormant. She left without a word, unaware her talons were trembling. Thalaxi, high scholar of linguistic systems, visited Danny with an academic request. Terran idioms are inconsistently irrational. Please elaborate. Danny welcomed her in with the same warmth. Sure, but half of them don't make sense to us either. He offered coffee. She accepted. They spoke for an hour about metaphors that made no sense. Beating a dead horse, butterflies in your stomach, break a leg. She laughed, an involuntary, startled sound, and didn't correct herself. Later, Kryn, a senior engineer with calloused claws and no patience for sentiment, arrived with a malfunctioning data port. You were seen repairing a music unit, she said bluntly. Assist me. Danny fixed it in under 10 minutes. He also asked what kind of music she liked. No one ever asked. She lied and said she didn't care for music, but stayed as he played a quiet song anyway. Something Terran and simple. Wordless. They both left Danny's quarters at different times with similar expressions. Neither Zarelian noticed how the other's claws lingered on the door panel. They had not come to compete, and yet, they were already losing something neither of them understood. Thalaxi spoke first, tapping her stylus against her datapad. He listened to me. Kryn looked up from her schematic. So? He didn't interrupt, didn't lecture, just listened, as if I mattered outside of my function. Kryn rolled her eyes only to catch herself halfway. She was about to dismiss it, again, until she heard her own voice echoing back. I said the same thing yesterday. They sat in silence. Zarelian discourse had no framework for this kind of overlap. Emotional echoes carried like signals bouncing in strange new air. Neither of them used the word desire. Neither would admit the phrase felt seen carried any meaning. But both began to wonder, why did he see them? And worse, why did that feel like power? Zarelian culture operated through precise alliances, reproductive pairing based on strategic compatibility, never sentiment. Love was not only alien, it was inefficient, risky, illogical. Reproduction was handled through genetic optimization, matching sequences in state-controlled pods, selecting enhancements, removing weaknesses. Physical bonding was rare, emotional bonds rarer still. But now, Izara found herself replaying the rhythm of his words in her mind. Kryn sharpened tools that didn't need sharpening. Thalaxi drafted questions she never sent. This was not need, not chemical demand. Something slower, stranger, unspoken. If asked, none of them would claim it as affection. But each had touched the warmth in his voice and walked away colder in its absence. And the question, unspoken but growing, gnawed louder. Was this what humans called love? Danny, blissfully unaware, went about his week with his usual mix of awkward grace and quiet kindness. He repaired a malfunctioning music module in the AI core, whistling as he worked. He left notes for the kitchen staff complimenting their efforts. He brought fruit to a lab technician who forgot lunch. None of it felt remarkable, but the ripples he left behind disrupted the Citadel's equilibrium. Kindness wasn't tracked in strategic reports. Empathy didn't register on threat assessments. And yet the AI core logged an 11% rise in voluntary cooperation across departments, an unexplained 9% drop in disciplinary actions. Conversations lasted longer. Voices softened. Something was shifting, and no one could explain why the station suddenly felt warmer. The Council of Matrons met beneath the alabaster vaults of the Citadel's central spire. 5 Zarelian figures stood cloaked in shimmering robes, their biosignature threads flickering with rank and judgment. The chamber's sterile light fell upon a central hollow panel, pulsing with red flags, unauthorized emotional flux, neurochemical disturbances, and one baffling common source. Subject 13, Quinn Daniel. Emotional bonding? High Matron Virelia whispered, reading the AI's analysis. In 3 of our most disciplined officers, added Matron Celine, voice taut, Commander Izara, Scholar Thalaxi, Chief Engineer Kryn. This must be an error, Matron Uxelia said, narrowing her yellow eyes. Or sabotage? The AI clarified in its cold, clinical tone. Data integrity verified. Influence appears unintentional. Chemical markers suggest early-stage imprinting, romantic in nature. The room froze. Romance. Among Xerelians. Without authorization, without mating contracts or genetic utility. This is contamination, Virelia declared, and the Terran is its vector. A silent decree passed among them. Swift, merciless. The kind reserved for biothreats, not diplomats. And somewhere deep within the Citadel's neural lattice, the AI sent a priority ping to Central Core. Emotion virus detected. Containment advised. Danny Quinn entered the council chamber flanked by two towering honor sentinels. Not guards, not jailers, but ceremonial watchers with blades he hoped would stay ornamental. The chamber looked like something out of an alien opera. Cold, curved metal veins, light refracting like ice through crystal, and the five matrons perched high on pedestals that might as well have been thrones. He smiled awkwardly. Hey, thanks for, inviting me? Ambassador Quinn, Matron Virelia began smoothly. Your presence is appreciated. We value transparency. Danny blinked. Sure, I like transparency. We wish to understand the nature of your interactions with several of our citizens. A hologram flickered to life beside him. Scenes from the mixer, his quarters, even the hallway chats. Clips played of him laughing with Kryn, gently teasing Thalaxi, and offering Izara a Terran proverb about kindness. His tone was warm, respectful, utterly mundane by human standards. But here it looked damning. You are accused of deploying an unknown form of pheromone-based emotional subversion, Virelia said, her voice velvet-wrapped steel. Danny stared. Wait, what? The symptoms are clear. Disrupted emotional suppression, biochemical anomalies, focused interactions. You think I'm brainwashing people? Not by design, Matron Celine said coolly, but impact matters more than intent. Danny's laugh was half panic, half sincere. I just talk to people. Exactly, said Virelia, narrowing her eyes, and that may be the most dangerous method of all. The trial was more of a public spectacle than a court of law. Xerelian scientists, diplomats, and military officers filled the vast hall, all of them watching the proceedings with a mix of fascination and dread. Danny Quinn stood at the center, the only human in a sea of alien minds, each one analyzing him, dissecting his very existence. The air hummed with unspoken judgments. Each accusation felt like a strike against his soul. His behavior, his words, his very presence, everything was scrutinized. Hollow recordings of his conversations, his simple gestures of kindness, played before the crowd like a series of crimes. He was accused of spreading an emotional contagion, a virus of the heart. But Danny stood there, his gaze unwavering, his posture awkward but steady. He wasn't afraid. No, fear had long since faded into confusion and frustration. He couldn't understand why something so basic, so human, could be seen as a crime. When his turn to speak came, he simply said, I didn't mean to offend anyone. I wasn't trying to manipulate anyone. I just wanted to connect. The words hung in the air, reverberating with a sincerity that cut through the sterile atmosphere of the room. He wasn't a politician or a diplomat, skilled in the art of persuasion. He was just Danny, an ordinary human who valued kindness, who believed in listening, in understanding. A collective silence followed. The Xerelians didn't know how to react. In their world, emotional displays were considered weaknesses, not virtues. Yet here was a human who had, somehow, shattered that belief with nothing more than the truth of his own heart. They couldn't deny what he'd done, and that was what terrified them most. As the trial raged on, Izara, Thalaxi, and Kryn sat together in the gallery, their faces masks of composure. But their eyes told a different story. Each woman sat rigidly, her posture perfect, her gaze fixed on the proceedings. But beneath the surface, something was stirring, something they couldn't quite name, something they weren't sure they wanted to acknowledge. Izara's fingers drummed lightly against the edge of her seat. The tension in her chest had only grown since the trial began. She'd tried to dismiss it, to push it down, but every time she saw Danny on the holoscreen, his humble smile, his earnest eyes, she felt a pang of something. It wasn't discomfort. It wasn't even guilt. It was deeper than that. Thalaxi shifted uncomfortably beside her. The usually stoic scholar had never been one to entertain feelings, much less allow them to cloud her judgment. Yet now, every time she glanced at Izara, she saw the same unsettling look reflected back at her. A longing, a recognition, and that word, connection. It had taken root in her mind and she couldn't shake it. Kryn, ever the pragmatic engineer, had started to tap her foot against the floor, the rhythm too fast to be casual. She didn't understand the strange tension, this emotional pull she felt every time Danny's name was mentioned. But she couldn't deny it, and that frightened her more than anything. Across the room, the matrons continued their harsh, cold deliberations. But among the three women in the gallery, there was a crack in the foundation of their unwavering loyalty. The xenobiologist stepped forward, his long, skeletal fingers splayed over the data tablet he held. He was an expert in genetics, someone who could dissect the most complex DNA sequences and reduce them to their raw components. But even he was at a loss for words when it came to Danny Quinn's genetic impact. Fascinating, the biologist muttered, studying the screen. The human genome, chaotic, unrefined, unpredictable. Yet it contains a unique alignment with Cirellian biochemistry that cannot be ignored. It's as though your species has evolved to break through every barrier we've put in place. The room fell silent. Matron Varelia's eyes narrowed. Are you saying that the human genome is somehow compatible with Cirellian biology? Yes, the biologist confirmed, still stunned by the discovery. But not in a way we understand. It's not engineered, not planned. It's random, a cosmic anomaly. The genetic mismatch, the one we thought was impossible, might actually be the key to unlocking something we've spent millennia trying to control. A murmur ran through the room. The Xerelians had spent centuries perfecting their genetic systems, designing their species to suppress emotional impulses, to control every aspect of their biology. And yet here was a human genome, disordered and unpredictable, that might be the catalyst for the very emotions they had worked so hard to suppress. The implications were staggering. This was no longer just a matter of diplomacy. It was a matter of biological evolution, a force they could not control, a force they did not understand. It was a threat, but it was also a revelation. And the Xerelians were terrified of both. Danny's voice was quiet, but there was strength in it as he spoke. The weight of the trial, the accusations, the fear, it was all beginning to take its toll. But instead of lashing out, instead of fighting back, he chose a different path. I didn't ask for any of this, he said, his eyes scanning the room. I came here to help, to share Earth's culture, to learn from you. But if my presence is a threat, if it's causing harm to you or your people, I'll go. I'll leave. I don't want to destroy anything. I don't want to make anyone feel something they're not ready for. There was a quiet sincerity in his words that seemed to echo through the room. It wasn't a plea for mercy. It wasn't a surrender in the traditional sense. It was an offer to remove himself from a situation that was spiraling out of control. I'll go back to Earth, he continued. I'll do what I can to protect our people. But please, don't punish anyone else. Don't punish them for something I've done. There was a collective breath held in the chamber. The matrons, the scientists, the officers, they all watched him with a mixture of disdain, disbelief, and something else. Something that felt almost like admiration. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. When Izara, Thalaxi, and Kryn stood, it was as if the ground itself shifted. The room fell silent as the three women, once bound by protocol, now stood united in defiance of everything they had been taught. Izara's voice was calm but firm as she spoke. We invoke the ancient code, the code that allows for reproductive autonomy in cases of emergent biological entanglement. We choose exile. The words echoed in the chamber, and for a moment there was no sound, no response. The matrons stared at them in shock, their minds racing to comprehend what had just been said. Exile was not a punishment. It was a choice, one that only a few Zerelians in history had ever dared to make. Matron Varelia's voice was icy. You choose exile? You, three of our most esteemed officers, would abandon your positions, your loyalty, for a human? We choose exile, Thalaxi repeated, her voice unwavering. Not for him, but for us, for what we feel. Kryn stepped forward, her usual bravado replaced with a quiet, almost reverent sincerity. This is not a decision I take lightly, but I have listened to him. I have felt what he feels, and I cannot unfeel it. The matrons exchanged looks, their faces ashen with disbelief. But the decision was made. The three women had chosen exile, and in that moment, the Citadel and everything it stood for was irrevocably changed. In the sterile medical bay, a quiet hum filled the air as Izara lay on the diagnostic table, the sleek scan of her body unfolding on the holoscreen. The technician's eyes widened as he traced the sequence, a tremor of shock in his voice. Commander, there is something we need to discuss. Izara turned her head slowly, her face a mask of uncertainty. What is it? The technician hesitated, his voice barely a whisper. The scan, it shows signs of early-stage pregnancy, but not from a Zerelian mate. No artificial matrix. This is natural. And the DNA, it's human. Izara's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, but there were no words. This was impossible. It was a violation of everything they knew, everything they had controlled for centuries. The idea of a spontaneous conception, much less one with a human, it was too much. What are you saying? She whispered. I'm saying, the technician said carefully, you are carrying a hybrid, a child that contains both Zerelian and human DNA. The room seemed to spin around her. This couldn't be happening. It wasn't supposed to happen. But the scan didn't lie. There, in her own body, was the proof of something that had no explanation. Izara closed her eyes, a wave of panic and awe crashing over her. This wasn't just about her. This wasn't just about them. This was something bigger, something that threatened everything the Zerelians believed. The hum of the aging diplomatic vessel was a low, persistent sound, like the sigh of a tired star. Inside, the crew was sparse, the ship's corridors dimly lit and silent. The air was thick with the weight of what had just happened. The Citadel, the great seat of Zerelian power and knowledge, was far behind them now, drifting in the vastness of space. Danny sat by a viewport, his gaze lost in the swirling stars. The only movement was the soft thrum of the ship's engines as it pushed them farther away from the world that had once regarded him as a curiosity. Now he was something else, a fugitive, a threat, an anomaly. Yet there was no anger in him, no bitterness, just an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. He hadn't realized what had truly happened until they'd left the Citadel's docking ring. The exile wasn't just his punishment, it was theirs too. At first he thought it was a mistake when Izara, Thalaxi, and Kryn silently walked past him to the common area. It wasn't until they all sat together at one of the ship's tables, their eyes avoiding his, that it hit him. They hadn't been ordered to join him in exile. They had chosen this. The quiet rebellion wasn't about the Zerelians fighting for their lives. No, it was something more intimate, more personal. It was about these women, each one of them, fighting to protect something they couldn't even name. A feeling, a bond, a connection. The very thing they had been taught to suppress, and they had chosen exile with him. Danny glanced at them then, finally catching their eyes. There were no words, only the shared silence of a new and fragile understanding. As the ship drifted deeper into the uncharted reaches of space, away from the Citadel and everything it represented, the AI, cold, logical, and omnipresent, kept its unblinking watch. Its sterile voice echoed through the ship's corridors as it recorded the event. Subject 13 Quinn, it stated in its characteristic monotone, may represent cross-species myth genesis. Recommend cultural study. Current trajectory is stable. Estimated time to uncharted zone, 87 cycles. A pause. The AI's voice softened, if such a thing were possible. This is not a threat. It is a beginning. The words hung in the air like a prophecy, both a warning and a whisper of something yet to unfold. The ship continued its silent journey, leaving behind the culture and control of the Zarelian matriarchy, entering into the unknown. Yet in the heart of the Citadel, something had shifted as well. The AI's analysis of the human interactions had already begun to filter through the vast databases of the Zarelian archives. Unknowingly, Danny Quinn had started something more profound than any of them could understand. There were no weapons used in the confrontation, no wars fought, no armies deployed. All it took was an unassuming human with a capacity for kindness, an innate understanding of others' feelings. All it took was the way he listened. And suddenly the grand narrative of a superior species, untouchable and pristine, was cracked open by something so simple it could not be cataloged. Humanity, in its deepest, most vulnerable form, had done something the Zarelians couldn't comprehend. It had made them feel. And now, far away from the Citadel, in a ship hurtling toward the stars, a new mythology was being born. A mythology that would change everything. As they journeyed into the unknown, the three Zarelian women would have to reckon with the force they'd unleashed, an emotional contagion they could no longer ignore. Their exile was not an end. It was a new beginning, one that neither humanity nor the Zarelians could yet fully understand. The Zarelian Council broadcasts a universal edict. Earth is to be quarantined immediately. All diplomatic ties are frozen. Earth's presence at the Citadel is suspended. The phrase biocultural contamination is now law. Danny is given a chilling offer by a Zarelian envoy: surrender the women to imperial custody and Earth will be spared sanctions. His silence is interpreted as negotiation, but he's already decided. With help from AI allies and defectors, Danny and the women steal an ancient diplomatic cruiser from a neutral port. Its engines are outdated but shielded against biometric scans, perfect for a covert escape. For a moment, there's peace. Danny and Azara share a moment in the ship's observation dome. She speaks of her childhood, sterile, strategic, loveless. Danny tells her about Earth sunsets and jazz. Their hands touch. Zarelian enforcers intercept them at the edge of a collapsing binary system. The gravity fields twist space, creating navigation hazards. A chase erupts through swirling distortions and black light vortices. Thalaxi, aboard a separate decoy shuttle, veers into the storm, drawing the pursuers with a flare of her unique genetic signature. Her last words tell him, "He made me believe." The transmission cuts. The ship limps into the cradle, a massive ancient space station known for honoring interspecies accords, long ignored by modern powers. The AI gatekeeper demands, "Are you carrying new life?" They answer, "Yes." A rogue Zarelian matron reaches out privately to Danny. "Leave now. We'll spare the child, wipe your record, restore Earth's standing. You'll be safe. Alone." Danny deletes the message without answering. The cradle's high custodian announces an ancient clause. Any confirmed hybrid between sapient species grants both parental cultures immediate treaty representation. Earth and Zarelia are now bound, whether the Empire accepts it or not. As systems flare and diplomats shout, Izara goes into labor. Emergency medics rush in. Amid alarms and chaos, she gives birth. Prematurely, painfully, but fully alive. The baby looks human, but with Zarelian eyes. She holds the child, whispering, "Now I understand. Your chaotic love." The room goes silent. Even the cradle AI doesn't know what to say. Danny Quinn's transformation from a humble Terran diplomat to an intergalactic symbol was as swift as it was unexpected. Once mocked as a mere curiosity, the pet of the Zarelian matriarchs, a cultural oddity in the grand sweep of galactic history, he was now a name spoken with reverence and awe. His face, once forgettable, had become iconic, plastered across broadcasts and news feeds across multiple star systems. He was not hailed as a hero or a conqueror. Rather, Danny was regarded as a bridge, an improbable link between humanity's chaotic, messy love and the cold, controlled civilizations of the galaxy. His quiet, unassuming compassion had sparked a revolution, shifting the galactic balance of power in ways no one had ever anticipated. His name echoed in the corridors of power and the hearts of common folk alike, from the heart of Xerelian political circles to the distant reaches of human colonies. The reverberation was not one of militaristic might, but of simple, unrelenting sincerity. Danny's humanity, his kindness, his ability to listen and care, had changed everything. In the vastness of the galaxy, where empires rose and fell on the weight of weapons and policies, it was the soft whisper of human emotion that had shaken the very foundations of their existence. The Galactic Assembly, a vast and complex body of political entities, convened in an emergency session. The matter before them was unprecedented. Earth was being offered full participation in galactic affairs, not as a subject to be studied, nor as a colony, but as an equal entity. The Terran delegation, led by diplomats who had once been sidelined, entered the Grand Hall in their formal attire, their faces a mixture of disbelief and awe. It was a surreal moment. The years of isolation, of being seen as primitive by the galaxy's more advanced civilizations, were coming to an end. Earth was now a player in the galactic political arena. The Assembly, for all its ceremonial pomp, had never witnessed anything like this. Alien representatives, from the cold, calculating Xerelians to the emotional chaos of other species, watched in stunned silence as the Terran delegation took their seats at the table, officially recognized for the first time. It was a victory not won by force or by coercion, but through a quiet persistence that no one had expected. Danny, though not present, was the silent force behind this transformation. The vote had passed not just because of political maneuvering, but because Earth had earned the respect of the galaxy through sincerity and sacrifice. It was a triumph of diplomacy, of earning respect instead of demanding it. Izara, Kryn, and the presumed lost Thalaxi were no longer exiles. The cradle, though still a sanctuary, had become the symbol of their rebellion. What had once been seen as their punishment, their exile, was now recognized as an act of defiance that would change the course of galactic history. In cultures that celebrated revolution and the breaking of old systems, the women were now revered as visionaries. The new Genesis Accord, named in honor of their courage, was slowly gaining traction across multiple species. To the outsiders, they were martyrs for a cause they had not chosen, but had ultimately embraced. To their supporters, they were symbols of liberation. Izara, Kryn, and Thalaxi were no longer just the exiled lovers of a human. They were the founders of a new way of thinking, of living. They had chosen chaos not as a destruction of order, but as a creative force. Their actions had sparked a movement that blurred the lines between species, showing that the biological boundaries that separated them could no longer define them. Their names were whispered with reverence in underground circles, their contributions to the galaxy's future celebrated by those who had always been willing to risk everything for something better. The shock waves from the events surrounding Danny and the women rippled through every corner of the galaxy. What had started as a scandal, a forbidden romance between a human and Xerelian women, had transformed into something far more profound. Alien news feeds debated endlessly whether love was a primitive weakness or an evolutionary leap. Xerelian poets, once bound by strict conventions, began to pen verses that explored the complexities of emotion and vulnerability. In the far reaches of the Empire, teenagers from various species began to imitate Terran courting rituals, which had once been seen as messy and unrefined. Across galactic sectors, a new academic field emerged: cross-empathic diplomacy. It studied how emotions could transcend biological barriers, how vulnerability could be a tool for diplomatic progress. What had been taboo now became the cornerstone of new discussions on interspecies relationships, cultural exchange, and emotional intelligence. The galaxy had been irrevocably changed by the simple yet profound influence of human love. Thalaxi, once the coldest and most analytical of the Xerelian matrons, did the unthinkable. She published a memoir. The book, titled He Listened, became an instant bestseller across multiple species. It contained no tactics, no political strategy. It was instead a raw, vulnerable exploration of her own emotional journey. In her words, Thalaxi detailed her transformation from a detached, calculating individual to someone who had learned to embrace the messiness of human emotion. He Listened was a chronicle of her deep personal shift, of her discovery that emotional honesty could be a form of strength, not weakness. The book resonated with readers across galaxies, from the most rigid political minds to the most rebellious thinkers. Thalaxi's journey had begun as an intellectual challenge, but it ended as a cultural revolution. For many, it was the first step toward embracing vulnerability as a tool for progress and empathy in diplomacy. He Listened was more than just a memoir. It was a blueprint for a new way of thinking. Kryn, the biologist who had once kept her emotions in check, now stood at the forefront of a new scientific revolution. She opened an interspecies research center focused on hybrid viability and emotional sensory bonding. Her research was controversial, but it was also revolutionary. Kryn's keynote address at the center's opening was simple yet profound. "Science never scared me. Feeling something real did." Her words were a declaration that the most important discoveries of the future would not come from sterile labs or cold logical analysis, but from understanding the raw, messy power of emotions. Her lab was equipped with the latest technology, devices that could detect and translate emotional states between species, sensory translation equipment that could allow for a deeper understanding of the biological and emotional connections between different species. It was here, in this chaos of science and belief, that the true potential of interspecies communication would be unlocked. Kryn's lab would be the birthplace of a new science, one that bridged the gap between mind and heart. Amid all the celebrations and victories, amid the dawning of a new era, Danny sat alone. On the observation deck of the cradle, he watched as his child slept peacefully in a low-gravity cradle. He was far from Earth, far from everything he had ever known. The enormity of it all weighed heavily on him. He had never asked to be at the center of this revolution. He had never chased history. History, it seemed, had found him. "I didn't mean to matter this much," Danny whispered to the empty room. He had never asked for the responsibility that had been thrust upon him, but now it was his to carry. His gaze turned toward the small, innocent face of his child. In their eyes, in their hands, in the warmth of their small body, Danny saw both a new future and an impossible past. He understood now the weight of being the first. It was not about glory or recognition. It was about sacrifice, about choosing to make a difference even when you didn't know how. It was the most human thing of all. Scene opens in the observatory dome of the cradle. The hybrid child, part human, part Zarelian, sits cross-legged under a view of infinite stars. Her skin has a faint Zarelian sheen, but her eyes are unmistakably earthborn in warmth and curiosity. She sketches constellations, names them with human metaphors and alien precision. She turns to Danny, older now, grayer, still quietly kind. Her voice is hesitant. "Do you think there are others like me? Out there?" He gazes out the window with a slow, knowing smile. "They're already on their way." His voice isn't prophetic, it's certain, as if he's already seen the shape of the next great ripple. The observatory lights flicker. An ancient beacon activates. An officer calls out, "A probe once sent into the void by a vanished Zarelian research fleet has returned. The data is partial, but the final message is clear. Genetic anomaly detected. Human DNA found in a non-human womb. Location, unknown. Species, new." Danny looks at the stars, then back at his daughter. Soft music rises. Not Terran, not alien, but a strange, beautiful fusion of both. A final line appears on a screen. New Genesis Accord, Chapter 1, incomplete. A heartbeat, then nothing. The stars go dark for a moment, then flare to life. Thousands of pinprick lights blinking in perfect unison.